and welcome to the little creatures that run the world. Give you some introduction information. Dr. Ann B. Mayo is a professor of biology at Weatherford College. She's degreed in the following. She has a BS in biology from
and that doesn't mean BS.
Hampden City College in Virginia. Do you want to do?
Well, I could.
She be serious. Be quiet. She has an MS in biology from Western Carolina University. She has an MDiv, I don't know what that is.
It's MDiv, so it's a Master of Divinity.
She has a Master in Divinity and a
THM, it's a Master's of Theology.
In Biblical Studies, Pastoral Care, Church Governance from Louisville, Presbyterian Theological Seminary, and a Ph.D., of course, in Quantitative Biology from the University of Texas at Arlington. Professionally, she has over 15 years of college and university teaching experience in biology, anatomy, physiology, zoology, genetics, human physiology, Bible, and theology. She has given numerous presentations, several articles in academic publications, and peer-edited publications. She is on the editorial review board of the online journal Texas Field Notes. Today, she will be discussing one of her favorite passions. I would think it'd be your absolute favorite passion, number one. Ants, Dr. Mayo.
Thank you. Thank you. Don't take all that seriously. It just means I've kept myself very busy and hopefully out of trouble. I'm not sure that's true. Is it all right if I cut this off? I think you'll see the slides better, and you're not taking notes. And if you want to nap, because this might be a good time to nap, I kind of feel like I had a nice lunch with Ms. Mimi Miotis just sitting up here at the front, and I'm feeling like I need a nap. All right, come on, can I do? All right. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about ants. And I guess you guys know ants as those creatures that you don't invite to your picnics, and they come anyway. And that's part of how they operate in the world as colonies in getting, anyway, don't know why that they do that, but they do that. Are you not going to work for me? Maybe not. Technology is always a challenge. It's not advancing at all. Anybody got ideas?
Is your USB in here?
That's there. This is one.
You need to get a tech guide?
Is it advancing on your screen?
I'm sorry?
Does it advance on your computer?
Yeah.
Just not on the screen?
Not on the screen.
So weird.
Yes, this is my tech person. But I can talk anyway. Okay. So what I want to do today is really introduce you to just the ecology of the ants a little bit, but also I want to aim towards this idea of bioblitz. Have you guys heard of bioblitzes before? Okay, that's the idea of going out to a natural area or a park and trying to figure out all the organisms that are there. All the flowers, all the plants, all the trees, all the bacteria, everything. And of course you can't quite do that, but what you do is get experts to come in who know how to collect that kind of organism, and then other people help that. And then what you do is try to find out, well, who all lives here? And what all are they doing? This is a really important thing for people to know the environments around them. So the people who help really love this, especially identifying birds and plants and flowers and other things that they really like to see. But it also helps scientists know more about the ecology, and we can talk about how can we keep it healthy. And if there are problems, how can we maybe bring it back to a healthier situation? So this gives us a lot of basic information about biodiversity. And I've gotten several students here to be involved in that in the few years that I've been here. So I want to talk about that. So the idea then is basically to start off, what is an ant? They're ubiquitous. Basically they're everywhere. Most of the time we don't see them because they're really tiny, and mostly they live in the ground, which is kind of a good thing because I think most of us might not want to see them, although some of us probably would. They're all in the same order within the insects called Hymenoptera. These are going to be bees, wasps, and a few other insects, and the family they're in is called Formicidae. We think there's something like 20,000 species out there, and we're still collecting them, okay? Especially places like Madagascar and other tropical areas. There are a lot of hidden ants there, so that's kind of cool. The other thing to mention to you is not all ants make formic acid. The ants that I study do not. If they have a stinger, which mine do, they don't make formic acid. So formic acid is a form of defense for a particular kind of ant or kinds of ants. Just so you know, that's not, yes, they're called Formicidae as the family name, but that's not formic acid as a defining trait. I want to share with you a little bit about their form, body shapes, and a little bit about their life cycle because it's really weird. It is. So here are some ant heads, and this is one shot. People take the face and then the side, usually, to identify characteristics. But you can see all these different jaws right here. Right, so they've got all different jaws, all different kinds of antennae. They can be different colors, different sizes, and this is just a bare introduction to their diversity. Sometimes when I'm identifying ants, look at them under the scope, I forget what I'm doing because it's just so cool. They've got little spines and little bumps, and they have ridges on their head or smooth heads, lots of hairs or no hairs. It's just amazing, that diversity. They also vary in their body size from 1/2 millimeter to 7.5 centimeters. Yeah, most of the ants are closer to this size, but we have some that are pretty huge. They vary in the colony size. There are ants we call twig ants or acorn ants. The whole colony is in an acorn. It might be 10 members. But there are other colonies that are trillions of ants. So the diversity is mind-blowing. They can have different kind of nesting, so they can live in an acorn or a twig. They can live in the ground. They may be very deep in the ground. They can live in the trees, up in the branches, that kind of thing. A lot of different places they can live. I'm going to go ahead. We'll talk about their ant form. I think you guys know they're insects, so they have a head, thorax, and abdomen. This is a spine. They may have a 1-part waist or 2-part waist. They would have a stinger here if they have a stinger. This ant with the 1-part waist would not have a stinger. This is one that would use formic acid to defend itself. The thing I really want to point out is what tells you it's an ant really is this, the antennae. They have an elbow bend. So they come off of a head area, and then they bend. If it has that, that's an ant. It may look like an ant, but if the antenna doesn't do that, it's not an ant. All right, so that's kind of cool. Go next. All right, here's the life cycle. You guys know this, I think, already. This is like butterflies. So we have eggs, larvae, pupae, and then we get to the adult. But in ants, we don't just make one form. We usually make at least 3 forms. Queens, that would be females that can reproduce. Males, that would be the male reproductive ants. And then workers that are all female. There are no males other than the males that mate. The males are around for a few weeks to mate, and then that's it. After they mate, they're not feeding because they get fed by the workers in the nest. All right, but here's another thing, and I don't think I put the word up here. Oh yeah, I did. They are haplodiploid. Do you guys know what that means? Have you heard about paired chromosomes? So you know, we have paired chromosomes. We say we're diploid, we're 2 N. All right, and when we make our egg and sperm, they're haploid, or N. Right? All right, here's the deal with ants. The queens are diploid. The females are diploid. The males are haploid. They don't have paired chromosomes. Wow. Right? So what does that mean? When the queens mate, they get lots of sperm from the males. When they are making their sons, they do not fertilize the eggs. So the eggs are haploid. If they fertilize the eggs, they're going to be females. All right? This screws up everything to understand. And this is true of all hymenoptera, bees and wasps do the same thing. Because nothing in animal behavior, nothing in ecology means the same thing because of this. Because you got a weird thing going on genetically. Just to kind of tease your mind a little bit, this means that the fathers do not have sons. They only have grandsons. Yeah. Those are fast. Yeah, so it's really unusual, and it changes the genetics. It changes a whole lot of ways that we try to understand the relationships. Because the workers, the females, will be very closely related, okay? Because they will share fathers. They may have several different fathers, but they'll share all the same genes from the mothers, okay? And let's see, is there anything else? I guess that's the main thing I want to tell. The alates refers to that they have wings. So these are ants that would mate and then fly off to mate. They don't always have wings, but often they do. Most often they do. Sometimes the males will be wingless, sometimes the queens will be wingless, but typically they do have wings. All right, go ahead. All right, so now I want to get into the main thing here, which is to talk about their ecological roles. So they have a lot of roles. They, of course, are important prey. A lot of things eat them. A lot of birds will eat, and lizards especially will eat insects. But there are a lot of important prey species, but they're also predators. So ants are going to prey on a lot of other species. You've probably seen a dead animal with lots of ants on it, something like that. So there are a lot of ants that specialize on meat, and they will go after those really quickly. The other thing that they do is these interesting interactions called a symbiosis. So they live closely with another organism and exchange. They do something for that organism, it does something for them. We have this going on for our distribution collection of seeds, although ants usually eat the seeds. So they're not exactly the partner you want for that. Some of them raise aphids. That's another insect that actually drinks the juices of plants. And they actually move them around. So if a plant has aphids on it, so the ants have the aphids here, they kind of herd them. That plant will respond by stopping to send its glucose in that leaf. It'll move it to another part of the plant. The ants will then pick up those aphids and move them to the other part of the plant. So what they're doing is they're drinking the nectar as it comes out of the rear end of the aphid. So the aphid doesn't need all that. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it is kind of cool. The other thing that they do, some of them raise fungus. You've probably heard of that with the leaf cutter ants, and there's some other fungus growing ants that do similar. So they actually collect leaves and flower parts, take them into their nests, masticate them, chew them up, and feed them to this fungus that then grows little fruiting structures, and that's what the ants eat. And in that case, we actually know that you've got a species of that ant for a species of that fungus. When the queens fly from that nest to start their own colony, they take that fungus with them in their mouth.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. They're doing a lot of work on that at UT in Austin. Okay, the other thing is some of these guys actually protect the plants that then also help them out. And they help them out by making nesting structures for them that I'll show you. They also are really big recyclers. That's the main thing they do in the ecological system. They're taking stuff above ground, taking it into the ground, using it, leaving middens or waste in there. Ant nests, great place if you're a seed. You hope you get in there and they don't eat you because you're in the perfect place to sprout. Nobody's coming in an ant nest. You're not going to do it. All right. So here's some of the food webs. I study this Comanche harvester ant, and here they're on a vine caterpillar. They're not real good at organizing how to get this to their nest. So the nest, I think, was maybe a few feet over here, and in 30 minutes they hadn't gotten it to the nest. What they're doing is they're going this way, they're going this way, and they're going this way, and one lets go and stands back, and somebody else grabs hold, and they go over here. They're not good at communicating. Other ant species, 2 seconds, it would have been in the nest. So it's different styles of communication. This is probably one of my favorite pictures. Do you guys know what that is? Anybody? This is scat or droppings from a lizard. And we know that because of the white marking there, that's diagnostic for that. This is from the horned lizard, or horned toad. You guys know the horny lizards? Horny toads? Not sure what else you guys call them. Horned frogs, that's it. TCU. All right, so what's going on here? That is that animal's dropping. I saw this in Big Bend, and I thought, oh, what is it? You know, because they eat my ants. They eat harvester ants. So I wanted to see what is in there. And I just touched this and it shattered. It was solid ant heads. That's all that was in the feces. So they couldn't digest the exoskeleton, but they got everything else. I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh. All right. Here's one of the Comanche bringing in a seed. So sometimes the seeds are quite long. They can still handle them. And here's a predator. This is a black widow spider. And this spider had built its web almost over the entrance to the ant nest. And it had, I think, 6 or 7 Comanche ants in there that had. So it comes down, here they come back, grabs it, takes it up to the web, stings it, wraps it up, goes back for another one. So there's some other species that do it too, but the black widows are good. So that's going to be important here. Go to the next one. So here's another slide I wanted to share with you. Some ant relationships. So typically ant species don't get along, and ant colonies don't get along. You know, this is my territory, you can't come in, these are my babies, you're not coming anywhere near. And in fact, you guys probably know, if you stand on a harvester ant nest for very long, they're going to get on you and sting you, right? Because they don't want you there. And you know the red-imported fire ant is really good at that. All right, well here's some other situations. So here I have a native, what are native, you can't see it real well, I'm sorry, but this is a native fire ant, Solenopsis xylani, so it belongs in Texas. And they have, they're really small, and in here, in this nest, there's this other ant, and it's the other ant's nest, which is called Trachymyrmex. These are fungus-growing ants, but they're not the leaf-cutter ants, they're a smaller species. And I observed this, and see if you can figure out why this would happen. So here's this Trachymyrmex nest, and those ants are coming in and out with their dirt, they're making their nest bigger, they go out to the pile and drop it. And the Solenopsis ant just comes right in, comes up to that ant and goes, touch, touch, touch with the antenna, yeah, hey, how are you? And walks right on in their nest. Wow. And I'm going, what? And then the ant, a little bit later, comes right on. I have no idea what it did in the nest. I do not understand that.
He threw his scent all over. The scent of the ant that lived there was put all over the intruder, so the other ones didn't notice.
It could be something like that is going on. But I'll share with you that my friend John Seal, who is at UT Tyler, studies these ants and the trachymeromix. And I asked him about it. He goes, see it all the time, have no idea.
Wow.
We don't know what they're doing in there. You're right that that could be how they're doing that. But the fact that it could come up and begin to just do its antenna with the first one, you'd think that first one would go, wait a minute, something lying here. We don't know if there's some kind of symbiosis going on there. But if you guys think of an idea, email me. Because that's a real puzzle.
Hypnosis.
If we have time, I'll tell you a joke about the antenna movements. So this is another Comanche harvester ant with these Forellus ants on it, and they're actually tormenting this ant. So what's happened here is the nest for Comanche was here, and right on the edge of their nest area is a Forellus nest, and this girl is coming back from having done something, and as she crosses near their nest, they're like, wait a minute, and they're all over her. In fact, there ended up being like 5 or 6 of them, pulling on her antenna, biting on her legs, you know, you don't belong here. And of course she's bigger, and she's like, just go away, guys, just go away. So they have like little skirmishes and wars.
Oh, you got it.
All right, go ahead. The mutualisms, though, are really interesting. So I have a couple that I want to talk to you about, and I have another slide too. So it turns out ants are pretty poor pollinators. All right, they're more interested in eating stuff than they are. They're not interested too much in nectar. Some of them would take some nectar, but they're not going to do much for pollination. They may do it accidentally, but not like bees do, okay? But one thing that they do is they will collect seeds. So these are Athena ants. We have several species here. This is a trillium seed. So in eastern parts of Texas where we have native trilliums, these girls would be attracted to that seed by this part. It's called an eliasome. It's a sugar packet. And the plants make that to attract these ants. The ants come, they take that seed, oh great, we got a sugar packet. They take it to their nest. They eat the eliasome. They leave the seed alone. So they plant the seed that way. And as I said before, you don't want to go in an ant nest. If you're not the right species, you're going to be dead pretty quickly. So that's really, really cool. And then these are some of the trachymeromix I showed you before. They're fungus growing ants, so they would be doing the fungus thing. And then we do have some Forellia species that do pollinate a little bit. I'm not sure that they're as intentional as bees, but they do a little bit of that. All right, if you want to go next. So here's a really cool symbiosis. This is with acacia species. And what we have, this is the tree. And on the tree, it makes thorns. You may be familiar with that. And it actually has them, they're hollow, and the ants nest in there. And heaven forbid you should touch this tree. As soon as you do, those ants come out, they're all over you. In many cases, the ants will actually clear any trees around it. So if another tree sprouts up, it'll go and take that one out. In some tropical areas, they call them devil's gardens, because suddenly you see this cleared area, and that's what it's doing. Also, these guys will make little sugar packets, especially for the ants. So this is a symbiosis that's developed. And in some cases, they actually make little enlarged nodules on their stems as well that are meant for the ants to build their nests in there. So like I said, you don't want to touch that. I actually had a friend who went in, I think somewhere in South America in the jungle, and he was about to grab hold of a part of a tree to help himself climb up the hillside or something, and his friend said, no, don't touch that, don't touch that, because it was one of these. And he knew as soon as he grabbed it, he'd be covered up with the ants attacking him. Yeah. So the plants love it though, right? They actually benefit if there aren't other trees growing up in the same area. They're not competing for that area. Right, so on the next one. So leafcutter ants, I talked to you about before. So they're getting leaves to grow the fungus one. Here's a close-up of that fungus garden. And this is what part of a nest looks like. And so friends of mine, Ted Schultz and some others, he's at Smithsonian, went down, I think this is in Brazil, and they had this great idea to make a nest cast with concrete. So they pour concrete in, and then they had to dig it up. I don't know how they got it out. I don't know if they got it totally out. But you can see right there, it's pretty extensive. You've got all these areas, which would be the interconnecting tunnels. The round areas are where they're growing the fungus. So they have fungus gardens in there. The other thing I want to point out to you is you notice you've got a worker carrying the leaf. These are majors. And you've got these little ones on here. They're called minims. Do you know what they could be doing? Why are we riding on those leaves? Any idea?
I don't know, it's Uber?
I was thinking transportation, but I hadn't thought Uber. No, they're actually protecting the ones that are bringing in the leaves. It turns out there's a fly that will come and parasitize these ants. They'll lay their eggs in them as they're carrying the leaves. So what these minims do is they wave their antennae legs and go, no, no, can't land on my girl. And so they chase them off like that way. I told Alex Wilde, my friend who took most of these photos, I said, I want one on my shoulder. All right, so those are minims. That's the smaller cast. They can also actually engineer the environment. And what we mean by that is by their activities, they change it significantly. Sometimes that's a good thing for other species. You can see here, that's an ant trail that's made by our own harvester ants. Right? So they chew down the grass a little bit, but also they go on that trail all the time. That's from the Fort Worth Nature Center. And here's another example, and you can see some of the ants there. Okay? Trachymeromix, the one I showed you before, the little one with the Solenopsis species coming in, that's what its nest looks like. So the hole for it is probably about here. It comes out and takes its dirt from the nest to the side. It's a crescent shape, and at one point it'll come all the way around. Another form of Trachymeromix makes a turret nest, and let's see if I can do this without being rude. So they're in marshy areas, and the nest sticks up like this. That turret sticks up. I have no idea why, but they have to crawl up it to come out, and then they crawl back down, and they go and do their thing, get their food or whatever, come back up, and go in. So that's kind of unusual. But they will change that. You'll have this open area around it. These will be open areas. That's a typical harvester ant nest you're probably used to seeing. Okay, they can be 1 meter, 2 meters across. And if you've ever been to some of the parks in Arlington, there are areas where you can look down the baseball field, and there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. You can see them. So they're obviously changing. No plants can grow here. They will chew you down. And yet they're harvesting seeds. So what do? They toss the seeds out on the edges. So around the edges, you see the plants they've been feeding on, if any of those seeds are still viable. All right, in the early days, there was a man, 1800s, 1850s or so, there was a man who lived in this area of Texas who thought they were agricultural ants, that they were planting those seeds. And then finally they figured out, no, it's just the garbage that they're tossing out, but it shows you what they eat. So they forage those. Right. Some other things that they do, of course, is taking material that's above ground and bring it below. Here's some ants, kind of little bottleneck at their nest entrance, bringing dirt out but taking seeds in. So they connect the above ground with the below ground area just from that. That's going to help also with seed formation, soil formation. So they're bringing up debris that's deeper in the nest, and they're mixing it up some, so that helps with that. Their nesting activities, of course, they'll have some garbage in there that they might not take out. Some don't always do that, so you can have that going on there, and of course the trillium seeds could sprout there. I also had a friend who studied snakes and stuff like that, so herps, and he had indication of some snakes, little snakes that will live in these ant nests. Apparently they don't bother the ants, and they're safe in there too, because who wants to come in an ant nest? All right, so that's kind of cool. Go on to the next one. So this is what the inside of an ant nest could look like. This is my colleague, and I guess he was on my committee, so my mentor. This is Walter Schinkel at Florida State. And he got this idea, and some others have followed it. This is an aluminum cast of a similar ant, one that only lives east of the Mississippi. But all the little rounded, kind of flattened structures are chambers where seeds would be kept, or larvae, eggs. The queen would be down, way down at the bottom. And then up here, where the chambers where the workers hang out until it's warm enough to go out and do their work, and then they come in and hang out there. He's done this with aluminum here. He can get it free from the shipyards. But you can also do it with plaster, which is what I've tried to do here with not a whole lot of success, and also with wax. If you do it with wax, you can see where the ants are. If you do it with plaster, when you can get that shape, but then when you're done measurements, you can actually dissolve the plaster and get the ants out and get a count of the colony, which is really useful. I've only been able to get the first part of that. I haven't been able to get the plaster to go all the way down. I think that's because Texas is hot and dry. That could be a big problem. I have had some students help me with that, Weatherford college students. So that's kind of cool. What you can see here is that we got lots of tunnels for water and gas exchange, so carbon dioxide, oxygen exchange in the soil. All right, this is great for soil health. Really, really, really important for that. I think that's about what I can tell you, unless you have questions. Go to the next slide. We can also use ants as bioindicators, so to indicate the health of our ecosystems, and we can do that by the species that are present and how much, all right? Turns out that they're really easy to assess. You can collect them pretty easily, unlike polar bears and grizzly bears and caribou and bobcats that don't really want to hang around and might be more sneaky. They're a little bit easier to find. They have such a diversity of ecology in terms of what they eat, how they're interacting. So if we see lots of diversity of species, we know that ecosystem's pretty healthy because these things are taking place. And a lot of things eat them, so that would be true too. This is one of my nests, so it's a Comanche harvester, so this is sand. They live in soil that's usually 6 to 10 feet of sand at least in depth. That's the soil they want to live in. And they compete with digger bees. And I've actually seen them pluck up digger bee nests. So the nests were in this area, they would go and fill it. And the digger bees have to go, okay, I guess I have to go have my baby somewhere else. So they compete for that. We can do this by monitoring the ant species we have, how many, and if that's changing over time. And we actually have used that to determine if ecosystems are coming back. So for instance, in areas where they had copper mining, it really destroyed the soil and the ecosystem when they left all that stuff. What they did was they monitored as the ants came back, the soil changed, right? And then the plants changed, and then you get other animals back. So you see that succession to a healthier system. And there's been a lot of discussion on doing this because they're easier and cheaper to handle to do that than a lot of other animal species we might look at. We can also see the impact of invasive species. The red important fire ant has been really bad. I know you are familiar with that with ourselves, and maybe some attacks on some of our vertebrates, right, bird species and things like that. But also when they come through, the fire ant is going through the soil and then surfaces to forage above. All right, when they go through the soil, anything they find they kill or eat, including other ant species. So they really decimate all kinds of things in a lot of ways. What we're seeing now is that they seem to be acclimating to our ecosystems. So they're not quite as invasive, they're not quite as robust as they were when they first came. All right, but the key to how we have them here, of course they got brought in, but we keep watering our lawns of St. Augustine grass. That's what they like. That's their ecosystem. Okay, foreign grass, lots of water, and it's hot. As we get farther north, we don't see them because it's cooler and they don't have the same kind of grass. With global climate change, we might see them expanding northwards, and also east and west too. So that could be really a difficulty. So we can monitor our land use changes and do some kind of management. I've been working with Fort Worth Nature Center folks along those lines in terms of their trying to control the woody plants and keep prairie by doing burning. So we're trying to use that as a way to do that. All right, want to go to the next? So we can use these potentially as our bioindicators because of all these roles, easily to access all these health issues with the ecosystem. The studies are kind of mixed. And I say that all biologists want to say my species is the best and the most important. But I'll tell you, ants are pretty robust. They like it hot. Most of them like it hot. There are some that like it cooler, but most of them will like it hot. They're not so vulnerable because many of them will eat many different things. They can interact in different ways. You don't want them to come in your house, they'll find a way to come in anyway. They're very, very tiny, so they may not be quite as vulnerable as a lot of our other species. Generally opportunistic, so if they've got an opportunity to nest there, they will nest there. They may come into your house temporarily because it's not nice outside, maybe there's not enough moisture, and then they'll move out. So there are things like that that are going on. They're really adaptable. They also may not result in detectable changes in those ecosystems because of that. Unless a species specializes on that ant or that ant species, we might not see a big change based on that. One ant is kind of the same nutrition as any other ant if you're a lizard. Okay? The other issue, though, is they're invasive ants. So that's a big problem. And you've probably heard of the pharaoh ant, maybe. That's come in from California, I think. And the invasive raspberry ant. You may have heard of that. That's been expanding its range. I have a friend who works on that one. And of course the fire ant. So those come in, they take over as well, but we're not sure in the long term what's going to happen with those. BioBlitz, this is my favorite, okay? So out of all this, they were saying, you know, my favorite thing is ants. I'm not actually trained as an entomologist. I'm trained more generally as an ecologist, and my thing is diversity. I just love diversity. So ants, as I showed you before, are really diverse, and I'm just spellbound by all their body shapes and ecological stuff. When we do a BioBlitz, that's what we're looking at. We're looking for diversity to try to understand the complexity of that system. And it turns out to be a great project for our students at Weatherford because we don't have an entomology class. We do talk about insects. We did in zoology, which we no longer teach. We do this a little bit in general biology. It comes up as examples. Insects are often examples of stuff and that kind of thing. But what happens is students can get interested. You don't have to know a lot to be able to do this, and yet it's important work. You know what we do? We go out in the field. You can't see really clearly what they're doing, but we actually set pitfall traps. So a plastic cup in the ground. We fill it up with some liquid, not to kill the ant, but basically to drown them. And we come back the next day and collect that to see what kind of ants we got. Okay, and we do that in a particular array. So, you know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or E.O. Wilson to do this. And yet, you get it out, and very quickly you can see differences amongst the ants. They're hard to count to species, but you can get some sense of the diversity pretty quickly. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, they do good work, and they talk about the environment, and do a lot of that kind of good stuff. So it makes a really good project. It's absolutely necessary information whenever you start studying an ecosystem to have a sense of the species out there, and then start looking at what their roles would be. Many of them we know a lot, but some of them we really don't know a whole lot about them. Okay, the other idea here, of course, is microhabitats. So this was a prairie area out in, I think, Leland area. And so we've got little areas. Maybe this part of the area would be drier than some other part of that field. That would be a microhabitat that the ants would notice. And so like my ants, they'll be nesting in the species I study. They'll nest in deep sand, and you can have right beside it part of the field that's not in deep sand. Well, they'll forage over there. They'll go in the forest, but they're not going to nest in the forest. They want to be in open, hot prairie, and they'll only nest if it's 6 feet or so of sand. Arbutus, the species you're used to for harvesting, ants that makes the huge mounds, they also want to be in the open, but they don't want to be in sand. They want to be in clay areas. And there are some areas where you have sandy soil by clay soil, and you'll have the two species together, and they overlap, and they change each other's foraging because they're competing. But here's what's interesting. Comanche, my species, is smaller. It's about 1/3 to 1/2 the size of the regular harvester ant. Right? If you put the regular harvester ant on the mound of my Comanches, they run away, and you can tell they're scared. If they go in there, they're like, oh my gosh, where am I? Because they know they're dead meat, even though they're twice the size. Comanche doesn't seem to care. They're very non-aggressive. And so it's interesting to see those interactions. At any rate, this has been a really good thing to do. Every year so far I've been invited to do a BioBlitz, and I've been able to take students. Just got another invite to the Fort Worth Nature Center, and I have a new undergrad. I just found out he loves bees, and that's what he wants to do, and he's probably going to go with me to do that. Others are doing their own projects for that, which is really cool. He may do something on bees, or he may do this on ants. We haven't talked. I hope he'll do something on bees, because he knows a lot about native bees. Good, I think that sounds good. So I have to say, Fort Worth Nature Center has let me do a lot of this work out there. I've been real supportive. I still have a real tight relationship with them, which is really fun. They know all kinds of funny stories about me out in the field. And so they've been really important supporters, and they still are. We're trying to get some more kinds of field research out there, including possibly studying armadillo and some other, just about any animal they will let us study out there. I think that might be about it. Oh yeah, that's just my contact information. You guys know where I am upstairs. And this is my ant harvesting the burrs, right? Those awful seeds. I have to tell you this. So I had an area in Arlington where I was studying these guys, and they have their nest, and all these seed holes are on the edge, and I'm trying to take pictures of them, right? So I'm getting down, and I'm getting torn up by these seeds in their nest mound. So I decided they did that on purpose. And they're like, yeah, they do it on purpose. All right. So I think that's about it. Do you have questions I can answer for you about ants and ant ecology? I went kind of fast because I usually talk too much about all my slides.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
Okay, first one's really easy. The ones you call harvester ants, are those the ones I call red ants that make the flat, large, gravelly mounds?
Yes, usually the big red ants, harvester ants. Yeah, and these are seed eaters.
Okay.
90% of their diet is seeds.
And the other question is formic acid question, obviously, that's my question.
Okay.
So ones that have stingers don't have formic acid?
Correct. They have venom, which is really nasty.
And the ones that are fire ants are the formic acid ants, right?
No, formic,
Which ones
the
have-
fire ants have a stinger.
Okay, which ones have that?
So, acrobatic ants? I'm trying to think of common names that you might know. It's the chromatic aster genus. I'd say they have
But
their,
that's out of their mouth parts.
no, it's out of their rear end. They've got a pore on their rear end. So for ants, if you have the one part waste, then on your rear end you have a pore opening and you spray formic acid out of that.
Which ones bite you with their mouth parts?
Lots of them will bite you with their mouth parts. Comanche, the harvester ants will bite you to sting you better.
But the small ones.
Yeah,
I saw fire ants.
some of the ants are small enough that they don't have either, so they're biting you. But usually the bites, so the fire ants, they're usually going to be biting you to sting you better.
Holding on to
There's,
you.
yeah,
Hold on.
so they can really get that stinger aimed. Yeah,
And that's what makes the wells, right?
yeah, it's actually the venom. So their venoms, if
Not
they
the
have
mouth.
venom, if they have, yeah, the stinger, not their mouth. If they have the venom, they usually have something that causes pain specifically, and then other active ingredients. The ants I study, there's a species, I think it's Maricopa, in the western part of Texas, we have them in Big Bend, that's the worst venom of any insect. And it's got stuff that's cardioactive, stuff, of course, that all cause you pain. Allergic stuff to make you allergic. The whole idea is get away from me, right?
You watch that guy that puts the ants on his arm? I forgot his
Yes,
name.
I have seen that.
My
I've
son
seen that.
watches that
well,
guy.
Well, E.O. Wilson did this one. Do you guys know who E.O. Wilson is? All right, so he is like Mr. Ant biologist, right? And also Mr. Diversity person too. But he has a show where they're talking about, it's all about ants and focused on him, and he's showing you the fire ants, and here's a man, and he says, now I'm going to explain to you why they're called fire ants. And then he pulls up his sleeve, and he stops, he goes, don't do this at home. He goes, he gets the ants all over him, and he starts talking about them. You can see him stinging them, and the welts are coming up. He's saying, this is a fiery feeling, and it really hurts, blah, blah. And he's very calm, going through this, and he goes, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to get these off of me. I met the man, he's wonderful, but it's really, really funny. Going back to eBay's doing the antennae, I have to tell you this story. So,
everybody, that's like, it kind of can catch you.
oh, is it taking pictures of you too? I thought there would be somebody there to do that, sorry. So my first entomology meeting, they had a special thing celebrating E.O. Wilson and one of his colleagues, Bert Holdobler, who's also a big ant person. Bert is at Arizona State now. E.O. is still at Harvard, but he's not taking students. He's hanging out doing all kinds of cool stuff. But one of their students, Brian Fisher, who's in California, I think he's at Davis campus, he talked about, yeah, when we were grad students, we go out to dinner with these guys, Bert and E.O., and they would be talking about the ants, and Bert would go, E.O., the ants were doing this with their antennae in a restaurant. And E.O.'s going, no, Bert, they were doing this. They were literally ant biologist. In public. So I'm trying to do that myself.
How many ant species do you think we have in this area?
I was able to document almost 50 different species in the Fort Worth Nature Center, but I only looked at 10 different areas, and some of them were the same kind of habitat. So I would suspect it would have to be a lot more than that. I asked Ted Schultz that question. He's at the Smithsonian. And I don't think he had any way to answer, to give me any idea. It depends a lot on the actual habitats we have. In Texas, we have tremendous diversity of habitats. You probably know that. They did survey studies for a lot of the different states, and right now Arizona claims to have the most ant species. But those of us in Texas who study ants go, it's got to be Texas. We just don't know. And we've tried to get a group together to try to sample in more areas in Texas, because a lot of it's undersampled. If you live near UT, then they've sampled there, right? Because it's close to a university, that kind of thing. So I did some sampling out in Big Bend, and I've done some here, but it's not extensive enough to really make a good guess. I'd be easily saying there could be 100 different species because we have the diversity of habitats. It could be more than that. It's really hard to tell. One of the, just to blow your minds about diversity, so we talk about mammal species as being pretty diverse and birds as being pretty diverse. We're talking about 1,000 species. Okay, here we're talking about 20,000 we think that are out there as good species. In one genus, Fadoli, we know there are over 800 species in that genus. Yeah, that's a hyper-diverse genus. That was Leo Wilson's genus. And he published a huge book on it with 700 some species, and as it was published, we'd already come up with another 100. Yeah, so some of it is a matter of where you're looking. But we expect, those of us who study ants, that it's going to be, Texas is probably the most diverse state in the union for ant species. But it's really difficult to get the...
Has there been any cases of foreign ants coming in and wiping out a native ant species that they were able to document or see?
I think that we're in the process of seeing that happen in Texas.
You were talking about the...
So we have the native ant, Solenopsis xylani, and the red-imported fire ant we think has decimated that population, or species actually for the most part. The difficulty though, I hate this, so I had to teach myself ant taxonomy because I was at UT in Arlington and we don't have anybody who does ants there. And it turns out to distinguish the two species, the red-imported invasive ant and their native fire ant, so on their faces, they've got an area here called the clypeus that has to do with forming the top part with the jaws below. Well, in the imported fire ant, it's got 3 long hairs, one in the center and 2 on the side. In our native ant, it just has the 2 on the side, not one in the center. After I'd done all this work and identified all these ants, I had a friend tell me, well, we think that's not a good character. So it may be that doesn't distinguish the species. So in the ants that I identified as being some in one, the native, and some in the invasive, maybe they were all the invasive, or some other kind of mix. And this is a real problem for a lot of us, because I'm an ecologist, so I go out there and get the ants, I gotta look at the characteristics. A lot of my colleagues study the DNA. So I send them stuff and they may extract DNA and do some other kind of study, and at that point they would say, well, it fits this group or that group, right? But we don't always follow through that. This is a big deal in biology in general. How do we identify species? When we say it is, how do we define it? And then how do we identify? So I'm in a class right now where we are having hot debates about that.
Okay, one more.
Yes, ma'am.
So it rains,
Yep.
spring, whatever.
Right.
And then out of nowhere, there's a huge fire ant. Did they travel and make it, or were they underground all along and they came up and took advantage of the
I
water?
think they were there all along.
Okay.
Now, the other issue though is they could have traveled and made it because they're really good at dispersing. And so they are better than a lot of ant species at flying and then making it, apparently. That's one of the reasons why they're invasive. Okay, and then when they come, bless us in Texas, we're so special, they don't always have just one queen in a nest, they may have 60, and they're all laying eggs, which makes them expand. That looks like that's changing. Now get this, if you're east of the Mississippi, where they also have imported fire ants, they don't do that. It's something about being in Texas. Yeah, so that's really weird, and I don't know what, if anybody's tried to track that down genetically, or what that is. So we have hyper-diverse. But I suspect primarily they're deeper in the soil, because they can hang out there forever, right? They forage a lot, and they store that in the nest, so they don't have to be active all the time. And I know you think they're really industrious. They're not. They're very lazy. So some of these folks who've actually studied this, Dr. Gordon, who is in, Deborah Gordon, who is at Stanford, talked about this in a couple of her popular books. So she documented that the ant will come out, go out and forage, come back, and that might be the only time that ant goes out that day, right? Remember, there could be trillions down there. They don't need all of them to go foraging. Some are taking care of babies in there. And foraging is dangerous business for an ant. You could get eaten, you could get dried out, you could get lost. All kinds of things could happen. So they're actually not quite as industrious as the Bible wants us to believe.
So during the floods, I guess it was last year, they had a bunch of reports on TV about cattle about these flood areas where these cattle were walking through and there was these huge ant nests floating on the water. Are those just the fire ants? Because these cattle were just getting
eaten up by ants have to have ways to deal with things like that.
amazing.
And sometimes if you're deep enough in the soil, you don't get too bothered by that, right? But the fire ants can make floats of themselves. And what they do is, there's some ants that are in the water underneath and some that are on top, and they'll carry the queen and babies and whatever, and float. But what they do is they then will change positions. And there's actually an engineering professor whose name I don't remember. He's at Georgia, and I've seen several things where he's done the studies, and his students have been studying how they do this, how they are changing positions
So
and
they're
stuff.
just rotating, they've actually created a raft.
They've created a raft, that's how
And the
they're
guy said,
surviving.
oh yeah, and they're just hooked to that piece of grass right there. That's how they stay
And
in
they'll
the same
float till
place.
they get to a log or something that they can
Yeah.
get back out. Yeah.
Yeah,
They're, you know, you're not gonna, I'm sorry, you're not going to get rid of them.
Why is your ant called the Comanche?
Because, that's a good question. So I wanted to give you a little clue into my whole confusion. I worked with them for 3 years before I got stung. And at the time, I was primarily looking at their forage, so I'm catching them, trying to get the seeds out of their mouths or whatever they have, and they will not give it up. And I'm hitting them, beating their abdomen, saying, let go of that, they won't give it up. And they don't sting. Why are they called Comanche? Well, it turns out the type specimen was found in Comanche, Texas. So it's named for the place. And I felt so much better when somebody told me that. They're very aggressive. They're really passive, and they are. They will let other colonies actually come into their nest and come out. They don't care. But probably what happens is that worker comes in there and goes, wait a minute, this doesn't smell right. It can't be my home. And they leave. It's not like they're not aggressive as someone like the Barbados, the big red harvester ant you're used to thinking about. They're a little more aggressive. Or territorial, maybe I should say. Yeah. So that's part of what's going on. Other questions? Do you want to come to a Bible Blitz with me? April 27th, Fort Worth Nature Center. Several of our students that have been working with me this past summer on different entomological kind of stuff are going to go and do their own thing, and they let me know that recently, so they're volunteering. But this one is to James Crocker is probably going to go out. He's my bee guy. So I'm real excited. I met his parents today, too. They're real excited about it. So it's kind of cool.
Great.
Thank you.